All right, we're going to engage in a thought exercise. I want you to close your eyes and imagine this picture I paint for you. Picture a man who is just shameful. You might even say deplorable. From the beginning of his life, this man has always been the little brother, the younger sibling, with a chip on his shoulder, feeling very insecure about his standing within the family. And so his whole life he strives to make a name for himself, except the way he goes about it. The way he goes about it is by scamming and scheming. And he does make a great deal out of himself. In fact, his genius is on the art of the deal. Deals that he makes so that he never comes out a loser, only a winner. Now, some people, even to this day, consider this man a hero, even a saint. But his character suggests the complete opposite. This man is a liar. He's a swindler. He spends his time only thinking about himself. And he makes a great name for himself in doing so. All right, you can open your eyes. Now, I'm trusting that all of us were picturing the same man, and that is Jacob, the patriarch, right? I'm glad I didn't count to 3 and then we all said it together. Jacob, the patriarch from the book of Genesis, is the man I just described to you. Jacob, the one to whom God makes promises and asks nothing in return, by the way. God just says, I'm going to do these things for you, Jacob, and never asks Jacob to hold up an end of the deal. Jacob, the one who seems to avoid disaster and instead dumb his way into success. Jacob, the one for whom the people of God are named. That guy. Did you hear in Psalm 85, the psalm I just read for you, how it began? This is how it began in case you weren't paying attention. Holy One, you were favorable to your land. You restored the fortunes of Jacob. Now, when Scripture refers to Jacob, it could be referring to the patriarch Jacob, the brother of Esau, the one we read about in Genesis 32. Or Jacob could be a stand-in, a collective name for the people that God enters into special relationship with. You restored the fortunes of Jacob, of the people who descend from this man. Now, what does it mean to be named after a man like Jacob? Surely it doesn't mean that these people are perfect, does it? It doesn't mean that you're going to have a pristine record when it comes to your faith or your relationships with others. What does it mean to be part of the people of God from whom we take the name of this, from this name we take, Jacob? What does it mean to be named in his honor, to be part of his lineage? Well, if you were paying attention earlier in the service and you heard that story, it means that we wrestle. We struggle. We struggle with God. Psalm 85, the psalm that I read for you just now, is a psalm for people who struggle. It's for people who have this image, this depiction of God, and then have to hold that in tension, or even have to let it have a face-off with present circumstances in our lives. Psalm 85 is part of those categories of the Psalms of complaint. Psalms of complaint make up about 1/3 of the 150 Psalms that we have in our Bible. Now, for the summertime, we've been talking about the Psalms as these words that are gifted to us as the people of God. Words that we're invited to pray, to sing, to cry out. So often I talk to people and they say, how should I pray? Or I don't know how to talk to God in this moment or time in my life. That's what the Psalter is for. That's what this collection of poems and songs and laments are for. The Psalms are words from the people of God to God. They hold a unique place within the canon of Scripture. So often, these books collect words that God says to us, or words that describe the God we worship. Here in the Psalms, these are extraordinarily human words. And I don't know if you were paying attention to Psalm 85, but we took a bit of a journey in that psalm, did we not? The first few verses are about, God, this is how you have been to the people. You were good to the land. You restored our fortunes. You turned away your wrath and your anger from us, and we prospered. But then quickly we move into present reality. How long will you be angry with us? Give us what we need. your rescue. I don't know if you paid attention to how our service has been structured so far. We led off with the song, God Is. And we sang the very first stanza, God was never angry. Well, now we hear Psalm 85 saying fury, incensed, anger. How do we square that? The Psalms are beautiful in their way they use language. So oftentimes when we approach Scripture, we think that all of Scripture is using descriptive technical language, language that identifies something as it exactly is. So I could say right now that it's 10:11. That language I used is describing something as it truly is. When we get to the Psalms, when we get to songs and poetry and laments, we're encountering a different way that language is being used. The late, great Walter Brueggemann, who wrote an incredible book about the Psalms, a book that's been quoted several times by several different people this summer, Walter Brueggemann put it this way. He said, a great danger in praying the Psalms is that we will mistake their language as nothing more than a report on what is. We'll mistake the Psalms as something that's using scientific descriptive language. But when we get to Psalms like Psalm 85, what we're encountering is evocative language. Evocative language rather than descriptive language. The psalmist is trying to create with words what they are feeling inside of themselves. So when we get to these words from the psalmist that says, undo your anger with us, will you be forever incensed with us? Will you draw out your fury through all generations? The psalmist is not trying to tell you that God is literally mad like another person would be mad at you. Nevertheless, that's how it feels, right? That's how it feels. Have you ever had a time in your life when you felt like God was mad at you? When you felt like fury was being poured out on you? Maybe things were going every which way the wrong way. Maybe life was falling apart. Maybe you couldn't catch a break. And maybe you wondered at some point, what did I do to make God upset? We come to Psalms like Psalm 85 because we want to express what we feel inside. That's part of the grieving process, is it not? When we're with people who grieve, we invite them to share what's going on inside of them, to let it out, to not keep it down or bottle up or try to filter it, make it clean and pretty and on its Sunday best. We invite people to say how they are actually feeling and to pour it out, and we sit and we hold space with them. By the way, if you haven't caught Reverend Chris Estes' sermon from a few weeks ago, he does a much better job about talking about the Psalms of complaint than this sermon will do. So July 6th, you should go check out that sermon on Psalm 30. Nevertheless, what Chris reminded us, what I'm reminding you again, is that when we hold space with people, we invite them to share how they're truly feeling, to ask the questions that are actually going on in their minds, to pour out those emotions that they're wrestling with in their hearts. And our job is not to correct them, not to shush them, but to let it happen. It's part of the grieving process. It's part of the wrestling that we do as God's people, as people named after the wrestler. Genesis 32, you saw Jacob wrestling with this mysterious figure. Some say it's God. Some say it's an angel. Some say it's just a person sent from God. It's not quite clear in the story. Nevertheless, Jacob has this extraordinary encounter. All night, he struggles. And eventually, he's marked permanently by that encounter. Some folks interpret this as Jacob wrestling with his own identity, an internal battle where he comes out changed. He's so changed, so profoundly different, that he receives a new name. And names in Scripture are signs of calling, signs of vocation. Names mean something beyond descriptive language. They evoke a destiny. And so the mysterious figure renames Jacob. Jacob, which means heel grabber, from the very beginning of his life when he's trying to trip up his older brother and overtake his brother out of jealousy and competition. Now, his name is Israel, one who struggles with, wrestles with the divine, one who has overcome the divine even. That's one of the translations. This new name, Israel. That's what we are called to be as people who are incorporated into this holy calling as beloved daughters and sons, children of the living God. We too are called to wrestle. And part of that wrestling is processing, engaging those feelings within us and using the Psalms as like a prick on our consciences so that the emotions might pour out. What Psalms do is they evoke this intensity, this extreme kind of language, so that we might let go of what was in our lives, what once was in our lives, and instead be open to what is now and what is to come. Brueggemann points out again that what evocative language does is it lets us die to the old. We use such strong language like God's fury, God's anger, so that we might truly die. We might truly grieve what has been lost. We might pour out what is still inside of us, letting go so that we might receive what God has to give to us now. Now, Psalms of complaint always have a turning point. Well, I shouldn't say always. There's some Psalms of complaint that never turn toward hope. But most of the time, these Psalms follow a pattern. And if you were listening closely, you heard what verse 8 said. I will hear, Shema, I will hear what the true God, the eternal, will say. This is the point in the poem, in the lament, in the cry, when we turn from feeling lost towards something new. When we gain a new kind of clarity and vision. Where we once felt hopeless, we might feel a new kind of hope. Now, if you notice closely when you read Psalms of complaint, you'll see that the psalmist never says, and all my problems went away, and everything was happily ever after, and I got everything I ever wanted, the end. That might be a fairy tale ending, but for the psalmist, it's not usually that way. What does change is the way we perceive, the way we understand the suffering we are going through. So for the psalmist, he empties out his soul, pours it out, cuts ties with the past. And now able to hear, able to listen, the psalmist gains a new kind of clarity. And then you get this soaring language by the end of the poem, where we were in a place of complaint, of crying. Listen to these words, some of the most beautiful in the Psalms. Steadfast love and faithfulness will meet. Righteousness and peace will kiss each other. Faithfulness will spring up from the ground, and righteousness will look down from the sky. The Holy One will give what is good, and our land will yield its increase. Righteousness will go before God, and will make a path for the steps of the eternal. It's not because the suffering went away. It's because the psalmist, by working through this process, by being honest and pouring out and wrestling, gains a new kind of vision. Realizes that they're not alone in it. When we work through our grief, when we truly encounter and face our pain, when we do the work, the dirty work of wrestling and struggling, as people of faith, we come to this place where we realize we're not alone. And not only God is in it with us, but look around. God has gifted us flesh and blood companions for the journey. Yesterday, I mentioned that yesterday we had a service here where at least over 1,100 people showed up for a memorial service for a little girl who died way too young. And while it was an extraordinarily painful morning, it was awe-inspiring to be able to look around as somebody who participated in the service and see so many different lives surround the grieving. And not all of those people who came were squeaky clean. They also came with their own burdens and pain. But the way they're carrying it, their perspective on grief and loss, has allowed them to come to the side of those who have just entered one of the darkest chapters in their lives. That's what it means to wrestle. That our perspective changes so that we carry the pain differently. We may walk with a limp like Israel does, but that limp becomes a witness of what we have gone through. It can even become a source of connection and blessing for people who are also wrestling. I don't know if you've heard the story about a man named Ludwig Gutmann. who was a neuroscientist in Germany back in the 1930s. Gutmann also happened to be a Jew. Now, he was at one of the most principal hospitals in Germany and lost his position. And eventually in 1939, he and his family fled Germany for their own safety. And Gutmann made his way to England. And while most people from Germany were put in internment camps, Gutmann was spared from that and instead invited to be part of a research team for the sake of England during the war. Now, after World War II, Gutmann was in charge of a hospital that cared for people with injuries from the war, men who had come home from battle, men who were bedridden, who at that time in their lives were confined just to the bed and would often die in agony because it was thought that they would never recover. Gutmann did something extraordinary. He looked at these men in the hospital and he began to wean them off their heavy painkillers. He began to invite them to catch balls that he was throwing at them. Eventually, he coaxed them into wheelchairs out into the courtyard of the hospital to move around. At a time when it was thought that people who were paraplegic could never recover and were basically as good as dead, Gutmann said, there is hope. There is something new for them. In fact, he's quoted when other doctors saw him as cruel because he was taking away medicine from these men to soothe their pain. And they said, look at these men. Don't you see that they're just cripples? He said, when I look at them, I see the best of men. In 1948, Gutmann organized the first international wheelchair games that began on the same day that the Olympics did. Today, we know these games as the Paralympics. Why I tell you about Gutmann's story is because his own pain, losing his place, losing his country, being told that he was less than human, it gave him a way to see people who were also put in that same category. That he could use the suffering that he had gone through as a source of connection and hope for men who thought that their lives were over. And today, thousands of people from around the world participate in this joyous event where we celebrate the achievements of humanity rather than denigrating them as subhuman. When we read Psalms like Psalm 85, we realize that they are for people who wrestle. And what we realize is that when we go through through this suffering and pain, when we read these psalms of lament and complaint, we may come to a place someday, with the help of God and each other, that suffering is not without purpose or hope. For indeed, Christ, our brother, carried that suffering. God has entered into the suffering we experience. God knows it from God's own life and has filled it with the presence of the holy. Brothers and sisters, keep wrestling.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Weekly Teaching. To watch the full live stream of this worship service, you can view all archived streams at the Alamo Heights UMC YouTube channel. If you have any questions, email us at podcasts@ahumc.org. That's podcasts@ahumc.org. You can also visit our website, ahumc.org, anytime. Any related links are also in this episode's show notes. Again, thank you so much for being a listener. We truly appreciate your time